Welcome to the Creative Agency Success Show, the go-to resource for agency owners looking to scale their business. Join us every week to stay ahead of the curve and position your agency for future success.
All right, Jody, so we just got done speaking with Brad Ferris, and what I liked most about this episode is he was able to answer very specifically some of those questions that we get asked a lot, is how do I hit that next stage? So I thought he did a great job kind of talking about articulating what it really takes to hit that next stage. And so I think that was a really good show, and I think our listeners are really going to get that a lot out of it, because a lot of companies ask that. I'm at X, how do I get to Y? What is it going to take me to get there?
Yeah, and the fact that he's been coaching businesses or in particular, marketing agencies, digital agencies, creative agencies for 20 plus years. I mean, it's great to have somebody like that to be able to ask those types of questions. You know, you always look at the end in mind, but growth is an important part, and there's many levels to growth. And we talk about, hey, when is it time to hire the first, the first person to replace part of one of the hats that you're wearing as an owner. You know, maybe it's the marketing hat, or maybe it's the production hat, or whatever. And he talks a little bit about that and kind of walks us through those scenarios. So great conversation, and this will get definitely a lot of insight and a lot of downloads.
Yeah, wealth of knowledge. And it's kind of funny, in a people-based business, the answer is definitely around people, which doesn't surprise either of us, because that's really the key to success in an agency. So yeah, great job, Brad, and thanks for coming on the show. So that was good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Very excited about today's guest. We have Brad Ferris. He has been working with agencies for a long time, so I think he's going to bring a lot of knowledge to this episode, and I think he's really helped some companies grow. So I think if you're looking to grow right now, or looking to improve your sales, or all those other things that help you grow, I think Brad's going to be a great guest for you. So Brad, why don't you just give us a little bit of background and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. Yeah. So lived in Chicago 30 years, have 5 kids. My oldest is 31, my youngest is 15, so we kind of spread them out. As you mentioned, I've been working in the agency world about 20-something years. First as a consultant for the first 3 quarters of that time, and then in 2019 pivoted, working with the same people doing the same work, just in a coaching format as opposed to a consulting format.
Gotcha. Consulting versus coaching, what's the difference there?
So in consulting, when the implied contract in a consulting arrangement is, I have a problem and you're here to fix it, right? And what I found is that the I'm here to fix it part, I wasn't always giving people the best advice. Like, I gave them the best advice that I knew, but it didn't always solve their problems or get them where they needed to go. In a coaching arrangement, the idea is, I actually believe that you know the solution to your own problem. And we're going to work together to help you find it. And so I can be more alongside the business owner rather than trying to fit them into the box of like the perfect CEO. I found a lot of people, especially in the creative industry, don't kind of fit that box. And so how can we figure out the box so it fits you?
Great. So why don't you start off by telling us some of your success stories? I like the difference that you described there with consulting versus coaching, and I think that a lot of people would benefit from that. So I'd love to hear, about a couple of success stories and some of the things that you have coached some companies on.
Well, if I just look at this year, this year hasn't been the greatest year for most of the agencies that we work with. And, I had a client that came to me earlier this year who said, I think it was in March or April, he said, Brad, our forecast looks like it's down 30% for the year. And, in a people business, if you're down 30%, things are getting scary. People are going to lose jobs. Right. And he had just recently brought on a new business team. And so he felt like with sales down, that what he needed to do was to jump into the new business seat and really kind of drag everything across the line. But at the same time, the industry that he's a part of is really heavily affected by AI. Like, some of his clients are adopting AI tools to do the work that his agency does for them. Okay. And so if he jumps into sales and focuses on sales, then he's kind of selling the agency down the road in terms of the long term. And so how do we find a way to do those things at the same time? So talking to him, there was a couple things we noticed. One was, if he jumps into the business development seat, he kind of cuts the knees out from under his new business person. So helping him to find a way to support the new business team without really taking over. And that also allowed him to say, okay, it's not going to be this way every week, but I think I want 60% sales, 40% on the future. And so, we just played a little game with some poker chips where every week he puts the poker chips and where he spent his time. And then week after week, he's noticing, am I over indexing on the current solution? Am I over indexing on the future? And in October, they actually got back to flat for the year. And so that's a huge win if you're starting at 30% down. And he went to an AI conference with some of his peers and figured out that actually they're a little ahead of where their peers are, and things are trending in the right direction. So helping him to navigate that crisis in a way that he wasn't over-indexed on the present nor the future, and that he could get through it without stressing himself out, missing out on sleep, all those other things.
Yeah. Hey, Brad, did you do that like over a period of time, or was that like one or two
Yes.
meetings, or how did that roll out?
So most of my engagements are either once or twice a month calls, and then there's support in between. So in that first call, we came to the idea of, hey, let's start looking at some poker chips. And then he's emailing me every week and saying, okay, this is how the poker chips fell this week. Here's how the poker chips fell next week. And so that weekly email keeps him focused on what are the decisions that I'm making, and are those leading to the result that we're looking for? So it's just increasing his awareness. And so there were a couple times because of the crisis situation where we jumped in and had some extra calls to move him down the road. But this is the thing about coaching, is that I know that he's got it, right? He's just got a lot of thinking and worrying that's keeping him from seeing things clearly. So helping him to pull back a little bit and get some perspective so that he can do the work that he needs to do.
Love it.
Yeah, I think that conversation is key, right? Because I'm sure there were a lot of missteps, right? There were some times where he thought he had a really good week. It's like, hey, this is where I spent those chips. And then he looked back at it and said, oh, actually, that week wasn't as successful because this is really where I need to be spending those chips. And that's really hard to self-reflect on. But having someone there to talk through it and be like, well, let's talk about where you spent your time. And so I'm sure a lot of that was the conversations you were having with him.
Yeah, I mean, the things that were really interesting were, okay, here's my plan for how I'm laying out my poker chips. And then, my top one of his partners is sick. And so he's got to jump in and do her job for a week, right? And then another key person resigns. And so then he's got to deal with that. And so having these kind of things that came up, and this is really what we're working on more now, is trying to help him to build more contingency into his schedule. So that, because once your team gets to a certain size, there's always somebody that's in crisis, right? I mean, it's just the law of averages. And so building the time into the CEO's schedule to be able to deal with those crises as they come up, so that it doesn't throw him off of his key plan.
So are you using different colors on those poker chips? Because I think I like my job, and how much of my job is exactly that, putting out fires. And so it's like, how much if I had 10 poker chips, how many of those poker chips are red each week? It's if that's the fires, and it's usually half of them, right?
Yeah, right. If you just kept a couple of stacks and then had a box where you're like, how'd I spend my time today? Well, that was a red day, or that was a black day, right? And then at the end of the week, see where you're at. Yeah. But what he's doing with me is actually he's screenshotting his calendar and then just coloring it in. So it's the same idea. But and then I had another client this year that his agency is actually growing really nicely. Good. And he got to the point where he hired key team members to do all of the main things except business development. So he has creative director who's handling the creative. He's got an account team that's really in charge of the client relationships. There are no client relationships that are his. And we got on a call, and he's like, Brad, I don't know what my job is anymore. Like, what do I do?
I've been there. I know what you mean.
And then beyond that, once we started working through that, his other question was, but the creative stuff, that's what I do for fun. Like, that's what makes me feel like I'm alive. And so we helped him to figure out some ways to get those creative needs met outside of the office. And he ended up booking a recording studio and getting a bunch of friends for a weekend and recording an album. And he came back from that so pumped and so ready to get his work done because he had taken care of his needs for a creative outlet outside of the business. So those are the kind of things that I spend a lot of time working with people on.
Just kind of curious, at what level or what dollar amount or how many people, I guess, depending upon where you're looking at this in the world, it could be people or dollars. Is it time really to have, do you feel like have that board of that director level folks that that you had created for that gentleman.
So it's interesting. One of the patterns that I see is that when the owner pulls themselves out of service delivery, the agency grows really substantially. But and the looking backwards at it, you can't really see it at the moment, but looking backwards, I can see that the owner is often a bottleneck for growth. Because what will happen is there'll be a crisis for that client. The owner goes down and works in the client work, and then none of the CEO stuff is getting done while that's happening. And so we never get traction on the working on the business stuff because constantly being pulled down into the client work. And so I'm always pushing people, right, as you get across 1 million, start hiring your first person, and whether that's on the creative side or the account side, depending on what you're strongest at, but start hiring someone to peel that stuff off. And certainly by the time you're at 2 million, you've got most of that stuff off your plate. Business development is always the last thing that moves. But even by 2.5, probably you're bringing in a business development person, at least to support you, if not to take on the whole role.
Yeah. And so basically you're saying, hey, between 5 to 10 employees, that's when we first start looking at that first director. The thing that you probably enjoy doing the least.
Right. That's right.
To that person. And then the last one, I think I wouldn't say all business owners, but as a business owner, you became a business owner because you can sell. I mean, you're selling your idea, you're selling yourself. Yeah. That's why that's probably the last one, because you're probably good at it. And not everybody's good at it necessarily, but I'd say the majority entrepreneurs are good at selling themselves and selling their ideas and so forth. And so that kind of leads there. So you're thinking about 2.5 million is where they pretty much have the team in play. Profit wise, they're probably not doing great because they just put a bunch of non-billable people in there. So now it's time 2.5 million to put the gas on and really grow it.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And the other thing to recognize about that is that the founder, because I've seen a whole bunch of these businesses, and so I've seen founders that were terrible salespeople. Like they did all the fundamentals wrong, but they still sold better than a hired salesperson, right? Because they have. When the owner shows up, you believe them in a way that you don't believe a salesperson, right? And the owner can make up services on the spot, and the salespeople can't do that. And the owner can make up pricing on the spot, right? So there's leverage that you have as an owner to get more deals closed. Now, is that better for the company overall? I actually think when you bring that hired salesperson in and it narrows the range of services that you're offering, that's better for your profitability over the long term. Right. But holding on to that sales role, what you need are more leads once you hire that salesperson, because you're going to burn a bunch of leads.
I agree. We call it the Adam special in ours. Or Adam being our partner that loves sales but creates everything and makes sure he closes everything. It's the Adam special.
Why are we doing engineering on this job, Adam? Like, we're not much engineers. We're accountants.
Plumber?
We can probably find one somewhere, right?
Yeah, plumbing now?
I always say that the best moment is when the client says yes, and the worst moment is when you're driving home trying to figure out how you're going to get that done. Right?
Hey guys, here's what we're going to do. I know this isn't normal.
How hard can that be? Now that's a sentence that costs you a lot of money.
We actually record our sales conversations just because of that. We want to make sure that whatever's promised is actually conveyed to the onboarding and then delivered upon. Because a lot of times when you do get out of that scope, the onboarding team's like, "What do you mean? We don't do that." And it's like, "Well, yeah, you do. The owner said you did, or the salesperson said you did, or what." You just want to make sure that there's a clean handoff there. But yeah,
that's a great idea. I love that.
And clients love it too, because they can actually take the recording back and share it with other people if they need to, get buy-in from somebody else before bringing us on. It works really well, and we've had zero pushback, since we implemented that. Oh shoot, it's probably been close to 10 years ago.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's been great.
I also love how useful that would be for the seller to be able to reflect, to listen to what you're saying when you're not in it. Yeah. I think that would be a really
Well, it's real easy for me to basically listen to it and say, "What?" When did we start building, machines? It is great. It's a great tool all around. It's great for it's great for everything. And so I highly recommend it. Again, nobody's going to have any pushback, especially today's day and age. And we're talking finance. We're talking something that's super important, to the success of the company, and owners are willing to share that even. So, it's a great tool, great technique.
Yep, definitely love it. So you kind of mentioned at that $2.5 million range is where the biggest bottleneck and the thing that's holding you back from growing is the owner being too in the weeds. So let's fast forward that a little bit. What about that next stage? So I kind of think when you're right around 6 million, you're trying to get to that $10 million range, and you just keep stalling. So what's the biggest bottleneck there that you see?
So there's a couple things going on there. When you're building up to that 2.5 million, we tend to adopt a lot of best in breed solutions for project management, financial management, team management. So we have a lot of different information systems that have different information in them. And as you start to get up to that 6, 7, 8 million, it's too chaotic to have all of those different systems. And so we start trying to pull things together to have a more unified one source of truth in the organization. And sometimes that's just cutting and pasting things into a spreadsheet where, okay, these are the actual numbers. That's fine. Other times it's bringing in a more comprehensive tool. But I think when we get to that point where everyone's looking at a common set of numbers and understanding the business in a common way, that produces a lot of growth. The other thing that can happen at that point is to get to that 2.5, 3 million, focusing very narrowly on like one service offering for one client allows that growth to really advance, to really get focused on your positioning and get clear about the product you're offering and kind of offer that over and over again. As you're starting to get up toward 10 million, we start to have to think about, well, how are we going to grow beyond that one offer? Are we going to offer more things to that same customer? Or are we going to broaden out our target market for other adjacent industries that might benefit from that same thing? And that kind of doing both does not work. You have to do one or the other, right? You have to say, okay, we're going to open up our target market and do the same thing, or we're going to go deep with this client. Mm-hmm. And so making that strategic choice, I think, is really critical.
And I think both of the things you said there can be helped by having external people brought in, right? So you already talked about like taking the owner out of the business, and then when you ready to hit that next stage, it's like getting those outside voices, right? So like you can use all of your ideas and all of your closest friends' ideas until you hit a certain point, but at some point you need to kind of hear that outside voice to be like, maybe we should have a new market, or maybe we should fix some of these processes because I'm a new guy and I have no clue what any of these processes are saying or any of the numbers we're looking at. So maybe we need to clean up some of that stuff. So I think again, a lot of it has to do with hiring, and so I think that's the tricky part, is finding that right partner that can kind of come in from the outside and really catapult you into that next level.
Yeah, and I also think, cash is super important here, because when you get to this point, this level in your business, you really need to have at least that 10% of your annualized revenue tied away, the 2 to 6 months of expenses.
Yeah.
Because when you go into this new venture, whether it's going deep into the existing or looking maybe into other verticals, they're not all going to be successful. And you got to be ready for that. You got to be ready, optimistic that they will be, but ready that, hey, in the event that they don't, hey, I've got to make sure I've got cash to be able to support this new opportunity. And a lot of folks don't. They're the entrepreneur that thinks, oh, I can sell everything and everything I do is going to be super successful. And if you ask my wife, for about 15 years, the next year was going to be the year.
Yes, exactly.
And then finally the year came, thank God. But I truly believe that a lot of visionaries and entrepreneurs are in that same boat. They think they can outsell anything, and they can, everything they do is going to, bring in that money. But keeping in mind that they got to be super, they got to be intentional. They've got to have and build up that cash reserve in order for them to really dive into that next level.
The other thing that cash gives them is the opportunity to grow faster. Like if we decide we want to move into adjacent services for this same client, sometimes there's acquisition opportunities there that allow you to jumpstart that. And there's more risk on the capital side, but there's less risk on the operational side. If we're buying something that we know is already being successful in that market, then we have to figure out how to integrate it and sell it and all those things. But using some outside capital and having some cash free to be able to put into those deals can really accelerate growth.
100% agree.
Let's go back to the poker example, right? You've all been at the poker table, and that guy gets up a little bit, and he's super aggressive, and he's the one who's like basically running the game. He's the one who's betting every time, and you're like, I don't have the same money he does. It's the same way in business. The guy with the cash can be more aggressive, and they can take some of those risks, and then okay, which ones are going to pay off and which ones aren't going to pay off. And so that's the way I've always looked at it, is that like, going into a growth stage. Jody mentioned the 10%. Like, I'm advising my clients, we should get closer to that 20, 30% because we're going to need it to really be aggressive during this growth phase and make it work. Because it's the way to make it happen.
I'll tell you, the lesson that I learned in 2010 was the people that had cash going into that recession 100%. On the other end of the recession, you could clean up. Yeah. There were a bunch of people that had no money, and they were selling them for pennies on the dollar. Yeah. And man, you could make a lot of money if you had money on the back end.
We were super fortunate because our average client has about 17% of their revenue in cash at all times, and so they're really kind of designed and made, for this type of a situation. And during the pandemic, it was nothing was nice about it, right? But what was actually to their advantage is that they had time to react. A lot of folks were like, oh my gosh, my big client left. I got to make a decision today. And hopefully it's the right decision. Whereas a lot of the clients that had the 17, the 20%, Jamie said the 30%, had a lot of cash. They could wait a few days. They could wait. Yeah. They could make those solid decisions. They could take a risk that somebody else couldn't take. And they made it through even better than what they, where they were to begin with. And it could have been an opportunity hire like that, or it could maybe not even an agency opportunity. It could have been a hire. It's like, boy, that person we've been looking for forever is now available. Let's snatch her up and bring her on board. It could have been something as simple as that. Cash does a lot of things.
And when we're talking about that, what accelerates growth, being able to make that key hire, even when you don't know how you're quite going to cover it, like it's very rare in my experience. I'd love to hear what you guys have seen, but I've seen people make that key hire and they're nervous about it. But as soon as that person gets on board, man, we find work for that person and they're profitable pretty quick. 3 months, 4 months, something like that. And so being able to make those hires just accelerates the overall growth curve.
And I've heard Jamie say many, many times that two different, the same person, two different companies, one without cash, one with cash. He's going to tell the cash person, do it. The person without cash, absolutely not.
That's right. That's true. You're right. You're right.
And they're missing those opportunities. I think that's exactly what you guys are getting at, is like during the pandemic, a lot of companies were struggling and laying off people. And sometimes they're laying off good people. And so like, if I'm a company that has cash, guess what? I can hire that person that can bring me that new product or bring me that new service I wasn't offering before, or I can bring in that BD person that's going to accelerate it. So it's really just being able to take care of those opportunities. And to Jody's point, if a company comes to me and says, hey, we don't have any cash, but man, there's this awesome BD person that just came available, I'm going to say, it's going to run you into the ground before it's going to catapult you. But if you have the cash, then guess what? This is going to be your growth moment. So it really is about being able to have the cash to take those risks.
So can I ask about the other side of that coin? Because I have seen people, particularly after the last 18 months that we've seen in the market, who are still sitting on good piles of cash and aren't taking those opportunities. Like, because they are so conservative, they've been holding on to the cash. It feels uncertain. How do we help them to turn the corner to say, no, now is the time to make a move?
Yeah, I think it's looking at every opportunity, right? So maybe it is okay that they're not taking those moves because the right one hasn't come yet. And I think one of the first things we do with all of our clients is we have conversations with them. What are your ultimate goals? Like what is your 1 year goal? What is your 3 year goal? What is your 5 year goal? And some of those conservative people, their goal really is just to stay the size they are and be where they at. Yep. So maybe like having that cash will allow them to stay that size during these tough times. So maybe that is ultimately what it is. But you as a coach, I think you have to keep presenting them those opportunities and making sure they're looking for them and being like, hey, you have $1 million in the bank and there's this BD person that could double your business right now. That $1 million 6 months from now might be 800,000, but guess what? You got this great team member that's going to grow that million to 1.5 in 2 years from now. So I think it's kind of just like playing out the scenarios for them and showing them what these risks can bring for them.
Yeah, I think as a coach also, thinking through that, when we bring a client on, we're always looking at the end in mind, right? And so it's like the first question is, why are you in business? What do you want to accomplish? Do you want to sell in 3 years? Do you want to sell in 5 years? Do you want this to be, like Jamie said, just a hobby for yourself? Something that you can be fun for the rest of your life, being an employee of your company. What do you truly want? But as a coach, I think it's also important to revisit that every single year. It's like, because I was never interested in ever selling the company. I wanted to grow it to be big and then just continue to grow. But then it came to a point where I got an opportunity, and then that's when we took the opportunity. But had you asked me the year before, absolutely not. Absolutely, I had no intention. Intention. But I always built the business so it was sellable, and that was key. Every big decision I made, I wanted to make sure I had that 25% bottom line. I wanted to have 20% or more growth every year, and I didn't want to do anything that got out of that range. And because I thought the first time I do that, it will be the first time I actually decide, hey, I want to sell, and then it's going to be can't do it now. You're not setting yourself up for success. So I think the continuous asking, I think that's key. Don't go with just what they said last year. Find out, hey, what's the vibes this year? We still looking to grow it to 5 million, or hey, are we content with 3 million? Or we now we put the gas on and go to 10? How do we get there?
I also like you mentioned essentially the option value, right? Like getting yourself out of that seat where you're the hub on the wheel means that you have the option to be able to do something else, whether it's start another business or sell the business that you have or just go on a long vacation, right? Hiring that BD person gives you the option to not have to be responding to all that stuff. You can stay in it if you want to, but if this is successful, now you have an option to do something different. And I think people undervalue the option value that comes with some of those decisions.
Well, I think the flip side of that is when you ask people what their goals are, oftentimes the answer is, my goal is to not work so hard on this business, right? And so then that's where that comes in is, well, guess what? You need to be looking for that BD person, or you need to be looking at a CEO, right? I've had a lot of owners that I've talked into hiring CEOs because, they're great owners and they're great technicians, but maybe they're not the best strategic decision maker for their company. And so it's like, what roles are you doing and what do you hire? And oftentimes, having an owner just kind of be the face of the company and maybe do a couple sales here and there is really the way to get you out of the business a little bit and be like, I'm running a $12 million business and I'm working 20 hours a week because everybody does it for me. Like that might be someone's goal, and just understanding that for them as well.
Yeah, we tell clients all the time, the more that you can make yourself worthless, the bigger your company is going to get, the more valuable it's going to be.
When I say that to people, they're often telling me, well, I'm pretty worthless already, Brad.
I've been worthless for a long time.
I was going to say that's a skill that Jody mastered a long time ago.
I think that the other thing that brings up for me is, and we talked about this with my one client who got to the point where he didn't know what his job was, right? That there is a sense of figuring out how we're leading ourselves in those situations. That, my goal might be here, but I have this opportunity to do this other thing. How do I evaluate that? And what does it mean to me in terms of my identity and what I'm doing with my time and what I'm in this for? How does this fit up with my why? And I feel like being the boss does not always do a good job of forming us in our identity and our ability to lead ourselves.
I 100% agree.
Sure. Yep, definitely. All right, so we've made it to the fun part of the episode. That was actually a fun episode. The whole 25 minutes we've gone so far has been really fun. So I don't know if we can get any more fun than that. But I'm excited for this question. So you did mention the poker chips. So I know Jody's a card player. So I'm curious for each of you guys, what's your go-to card game? Like if you had 5 or 6 people over and you're like, I want to pull out a deck of cards, what card game are you guys going to play? So we'll start with you, Jody, because I know you've played a lot of card games in your life. I'm curious what your favorite is.
Oh, geez, card games. Well, from the Midwest, and so you can probably guess if you know a lot of card games. Euchre is a big Indiana, Michigan, Midwest type game, Wisconsin, and so forth. And so we actually had euchre tournaments a lot. So we'd bring in, family, we'd bring the family over, have a big euchre tournament, all the kids, everybody was involved. And so we did that, which was a lot of fun. So I'd say euchre is probably the family fun one. If we're going to a casino or something like that, I want to play the card game that wins money. So whichever one that is at the time, I'm good with that one.
Pretty much every time I'm with Jody, he wins money. So whatever table Jody's at, that's the one we have to be. So, all right, Brad, what about you?
Our family game was hearts. And my family's pretty competitive. We had some very cutthroat hearts games, and when we get together as a family reunion, hearts is a great 4-person game, but if you get to like 6 or 8 people, it gets rough because there's not enough cards. So we found this game called Double Elimination Hearts, where you use 2 decks, and if 2 of the same cards are played, neither of them can win the trick.
Oh wow!
It really messes the whole thing up because you can lead the Queen of Spades. Yeah. The other person is motivated to play their Queen of Spades, and then
it's gone.
You can win with the 2 of Spades or something like that. Like it's a whole really different level of game.
Interesting.
Double elimination. That I think you can do that in euchre too. I bet that'd be.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You probably could. Yeah.
Got a great new card game for the holidays, Jamie. Sorry.
There you go. I'm coming over, Jody.
What do you play, Jamie?
Yeah, so it's a similar game to both of those, actually, spades. So again, from the time I was old enough to hold cards, my dad was having me play cards all the time. So we played every game, poker, blackjack. We did everything in the house, and so spades was definitely the go-to game. And growing up playing in basketball tournaments, there'd always be 4 of us off in the corner in between games playing spades, and that's definitely my game, which I have translated to hearts a little bit when I can't find a good partner. I'm going to play hearts today because I don't want to have these partners suck. So I'm going to try to play a little different game. So, but yeah, no, spades is definitely my favorite card game.
If you're a spades player, sometimes you graduate into bridge.
Oh, bridge! I've never done bridge before.
When I was in college, we played a lot of bridge, and it was it's a fun game. It's sort of like the advanced level of spades, but it's a fun game.
I never played bridge, and my grandma was always playing bridge growing up, and I was a pretty good spades player, so she's like, I need to teach you bridge, and I never got down that path. So.
I was giving that a rummy. Isn't that the same thing? Yeah. Is it rummy real similar to it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great episode. I definitely think our listeners are going to walk away from this, no matter what stage they're at, whether they're just starting or whether they're trying to hit that next peak. I think there was a lot of good advice coming here. So before we end, Brad, how can our listeners get hold of you, and where can they find you?
Sure. Anchoradvisors.com is the best place to find me. And if you go to anchoradvisors.com/growth-phase, there's an assessment there that'll kind of tell you, as we were talking about those different phases of growth, like startup, growth, expansion, and consolidation. And it'll give you, it's quick. It's 8 to 10 questions. You don't have to give me your email address. It'll give you some hints about how to move to that next stage. Right. It's a good first step.
Awesome. Great. Well, appreciate that. And we'll put the actual link in our show notes here so people can get to it.
Great.
Well, thanks
both
guys.
This is really fun.
A lot of good information here. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving business success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.